Dungeons & Dragons. While many believe it to be a game about slaying monsters and living out your pseudo-sexual fantasies, it's actually a game about teamwork and collaborative storytelling. And living out your pseudo-sexual fantasies. Some people believe that Dungeons & Dragons is the world's greatest role-playing game by sheer virtue of it being Dungeons & Dragons. However, the real secret sauce that makes the game so great is the friends you take with you on your epic adventures. Like your best buddy Craig, who always plays supports and uplifts you every chance he gets. Or the Dungeon Masters, weaving narrative tapestries with naught but wit and word alone. Or that one guy who always plays tieflings in every campaign that he's in, and you're pretty sure he's about to have an awakening of some kind, although you're not entirely sure how it'll manifest. Truly, it is the people that makes Dungeons & Dragons so great. However, much like with any system that requires people to operate, such as sports teams, private institutions, or the government, it's entirely possible to get shacked up with some clunkers. I've been thinking a lot about Dungeons & Dragons lately. That's not a controversial statement, I'm basically thinking about it all the time. And I have played this game with a lot of different people and under a lot of different circumstances. But there's one story that sticks out in my mind as having the worst person I have ever played Dungeons & Dragons with. Now normally I have a pretty hard and fast rule of not talking about things on the internet that I don't like or are bad things that have happened. However, this story contains probably every social faux pas you could possibly commit in a game of D&D, so I thought I'd tell it to all of you as a kind of cautionary tale. Don't be that guy. And so that shall be the clickbaity title of this YouTube video. The worst person I have ever played Dungeons & Dragons with. Also, I want to point out right off the bat that this was a one-off game that I played in a convention setting and does not involve anybody who I know in real life who I regularly play Dungeons & Dragons with. Calm down, Matt, this isn't about you. I invite you, dear listener, to cast your mind back to a tabletop and video games convention ambiguously taking place between the years of 1993 and 2025. The show's got it all. Video games, cosplay, and a bunch of D&D tables whose sign-up sheets fill out in basically the first 5 minutes. Like, you really got a race for those, man. Luckily, myself and a compatriot of mine managed to secure our space at a Learn to Play Dungeons & Dragons table at 3:30 p.m. on the dot. Now, I know what you're thinking. Me, being the veteran Dungeons & Dragons player that I am, probably didn't need to be at a Learn to Play D&D table. However, my compatriot was still fairly new to the game, but also didn't want to join a random group by themselves, because stranger danger. Also, let's be real, nobody wants to play cleric in their first game, so somebody's got to take one for the team. And so the game consisted of myself, my compatriot, the dungeon master, obviously, 2 other newbies who were either in an established relationship or just had insane chemistry, like oh my god. And then there was him, who, for the purposes of this video, I will name Todd. Todd may very well have been his actual name, like, this game was so long ago that I don't remember, and I don't think I even learned it in the first place. Now, my first red flag about Todd was that he showed up to the 3:30 p.m. game at 3:30 p.m. For a bit of context, since this was a larger gaming convention, these D&D games had sign-up sheets that you needed to sign up for in advance. There are a lot of people who want to learn to play Dungeons & Dragons, and it is very hard to fit all of those people into a given area from an event organization perspective. And so the standard convention is to sign up for these games beforehand, so event organizers know roughly how many people they need to accommodate. But no, Todd showed up exactly at the start time and just expected the universe to work around him and his lack of organization. Also, I'm being mostly facetious here, like he probably just didn't know that he needed to sign up beforehand. But it compounds with everything. In isolation, that's not really that big of a deal, but with everything else that he did, it's like, this is just the kind of person you are, isn't it? And so we took our seats at the table and introduced ourselves. I said I was Ethan, Todd said he was Todd, Kyle said he was Kyle, Mary said she was Mary, Kyle said Mary, that's such a beautiful name. Like, there was fucking something between those two. Like, and the Dungeon Master, who doesn't need a name because they have a title, told us that we will be playing the opening sections of The Lost Mines of Phandelver, which, if you know Dungeons & Dragons, is a classic starter quest, which of course one can find in the official Dungeons & Dragons starter set or the opening episodes of the Adventure Zone, which, let's face it, if you got into D&D around the early 2010s, you probably know it more from this. Famously, this adventure requires players to start off with a level 1 character. Which makes sense. If you're just starting to learn how to play the game, you don't need to know what the fuck a subclass is. To aid us in this quest and to allow us to leave the convention center before it fully closed down, the Dungeon Master provided us with some pre-made level 1 characters. These character sheets were your basic out-of-the-box archetypes such as human fighter, elf rogue, dwarf cleric, the staples. However, this would not suffice for Todd, who instead asked the Dungeon Master if he could play with his own level 1 character. Immediately I felt like this was an odd choice. Like, this was a learn to play D&D session. The entire goal of this is to just pick up a character, learn the basic mechanics of the game, and maybe have a little bit of fun along the way. Hopefully. It's not like we were trying to create compelling characters that would stay with us for a 2-year long-form campaign. Like, I think the Barbarian character sheet had the name Ragnar. Like, that's just default Barbarian number 1. So this choice kinda put me on edge a little bit, and then I learned that this character was a sorcerer. Now, there is no malice to sorcerer mains out there. You guys are perfectly happy and comfortable with being shitty wizards, and I love that for you. However, it felt very deliberate for this man to be coming into a level 1 game with a subclass that gets its features at level 1. And yeah, we all know that level 1 in D&D is a boring level, but again, this was a learn to play game. The entire point of it was to start simple and not overwhelm new players with too many mechanics. Which of course meant my frustration was compounded when the level 1 sorcerer that Todd chose to be was a wild magic sorcerer. The sorcerer with some of the most bespoke mechanics in the entire game of D&D. Like, the players at this table are having a hard enough time trying to figure out the difference between a D20 and a D12. They cannot know that there is a D100. They'll break. He also explained that he was playing a Kalashtar and went into great detail about how that was a half-ghost, half-human person from the realms of Eberron and... I cannot stress enough, the people at the table were very new to the game. Figuring out what a Dragonborn is enough of a challenge for them. Like, Kyle was like, oh, Dragonborn, is that the thing from Skyrim? And the Dungeon Master had to be like, no, it's like a dragon man, like a man who is a dragon. And then Mary was like, Skyrim, I love that game. And Kyle was like, I love that game too. And the smile Mary gave, like, what? Anyway, after the unnecessary info dumping and the incredible sexual tension, the Dungeon Master then went on to set the scene before us. Now, the opening quest of The Lost Mines of Phandelver is a pretty well-known one. The quest has a pretty quintessential hook. You're a bunch of adventurers in a tavern, you have a contact, the contact has a quest for you, he gives you a little bit of world lore to, suck you into the story and everything like that, but pretty much immediately you are set off on your way. The entire concept of the adventurers starting in a tavern is literally a footnote in a text box that the DM has to read to push the players in the right direction. The very notion of being in a tavern is simply a thought starter to hook you into the world of medieval fantasy, but what does this man do the second he's able to do it? He goes up to the bar and gets a drink. Because, and I quote, my character is an alcoholic. And so, before the game has even begun, we have this 5-minute scene between Todd, the bartender, and nobody else, mind you, where he tries to badly flirt his way in order to getting free booze, which, it doesn't work, and it wasn't fun for anybody. But while it was happening, Kyle and Mary were just sitting there being like, is this what D&D is? Like, we're not doing anything. This is boring. I'd like to do literally anything else, hopefully with you. Also, the vibe of it just felt really weird. Like, I get that a drunken adventurer can be, funny in the right crowd and under the right circumstance, but to just come out to a random table of people and overtly go, I have a crippling substance problem, and that's meant to make you laugh. Like, that was a weird choice. Like, it wasn't even like an I'm a Homer Simpson-esque cartoon character of which alcoholism is a key character trait that is kind of funny in the right circumstances. It was more like, I'm going to derail this entire thing just so I can get booze. But eventually we get started on the adventure proper. We're in our wagon, traveling along the long road by the forests and the woodlands and the beautiful skies and all those other fanciful fucking DM words, I don't know. And then suddenly, we come across a collapsed wagon with 2 dead horses by the side of the road. Ooh. Which, of course, if you're familiar with the Lost Mines of Phandelver, or have seen a movie, literally any one of them, ever, you would know that this was a pretty suspicious sight. Perhaps something killed these horses and ransacked this wagon. Perhaps those threats could still potentially be lurking by. You know, normal reactions that brave adventurers would have when faced with such a sight. Todd shot a firebolt into the tall grass. He framed it as this kind of moment of panic, like his character just awoke from the back of the wagon in a drunken stupor because, of course, and then just decided to indiscriminately start throwing firebolts God knows where. I guess he just thought it would be funny, you know? But luckily for him, he did actually end up hitting one of the goblins who were lying in wait to ambush us on the side of the road. I feel like I should remind you that this is a very well-known starter adventure, the first part of which is literally called Goblin Ambush. And so, by the virtue of us having the jump on the goblins, who had originally tried to get the jump on us, we handily won the fight, with most of the enemies being killed by Todd himself. He was very proud about this, by the way. Like, in character, he was talking about how he did such a great job at killing goblins, despite the fact that he was also unconscious in a drunken stupor mere moments before. Like, I couldn't tell whether he was trying to play, like, a confident, capable hero or a drunken idiot for comedy. He kind of took the worst aspects of both of those characters, and that was just him. This also meant that the other people at the table really didn't get that much of an opportunity to feel powerful in combat, which really sucked because this was the first time they'd ever had a fight in D&D. The other players at the table who were still learning how to play the game didn't really have an opportunity to learn how to play the game. Like, Kyle only had the opportunity to make one attack, which he missed because he didn't add the right modifier to his attack roll, while Mary, on the other hand, only managed to hit hers because she rolled a natural 20, to which Kyle congratulated her on in a really heartfelt manner, and I swear I saw Mary blush. Like, it was instant. After the fight, we found a mysterious trail leading us deeper into the wilderness, where perhaps this goblin's cave might actually lie, full of treasures and adventure within. Todd said that we should head towards the cave, which was weird because we hadn't actually got to the cave yet, but that's neither here nor there. And when we did find the cave after proving its existence, Todd then led us in with a marching order that he decided. That pissed me off. I wanted to punch the man for that. Like, yes, there is technically optimal marching orders that you can go through caves through, you know, like people with higher perception at the front, or people with higher hit points at the front, so people can see traps before they happen, or get hit by traps and survive when they don't see them. But the idea of telling somebody that they need to be at the front of the marching order so that they can get hit with anything that jumps out and tries to attack them, that's... Like, I'm sorry, that shit just pisses me off. Like, I play barbarians a lot of the time, and I will willingly go first in a marching order so that I can tank any damage that comes out and tries to bite me in the face, unless you tell me to do just that. Like, I will put my life on the line for my fellow adventurers, don't get me wrong, but the second you say, hey, go jump into that trap to trigger it and take the damage, well, now I don't want to. And I could tell that Kyle felt the same way. Like, he was playing the human fighter. He had the most hit points. He was straight up like, oh, you want me to run ahead and potentially take damage? That doesn't sound fun. I don't like that. Also, I'm pretty sure the DM, like, retroactively removed some traps from the campaign guide specifically for that reason, because, like, being told to walk first in the marching order and then getting hit with a trap is like, that sucks. Man. Like, if you're gonna make the choice to walk first and then you step on a landmine, at least then you have the satisfaction of being like, well, I did this. I blew up both of my legs on my own terms. I think we're all kind of getting sick of Todd's shit at this point, so when we got to a part of the cave, which had a very small crack that we needed to either force or crawl our way through, this was when I thought I could turn the tables a little bit. Like, it was obvious that this was a kind of dangerous crevice. Like, there was only a very slim crack in the wall, there was a lot of rubble, like, it was precarious. We could very clearly tell that if we tried to, like, break the rock and make the gap wider, it could potentially create a little bit of a landslide situation, or, like, you know, rocks would fall from the ceiling and hurt us, you know, like, that's it was obvious that that could happen. And it was also kind of obvious that this was a sort of tutorial point where, like, if somebody was playing a small race, like a halfling or a gnome, they could very easily crawl through the space and, you know, feel like they accomplished something. Like, there is no greater moment for a first-time Dungeons & Dragons player than solving a problem that literally only they can solve, either by virtue of their race, class, or subclass. Like, as soon as they're able to do that, that's just, mwah, better than sex. But given that we were all medium humanoids, we kind of had to put on our thinking caps a little bit. So I said, hey Todd, you're a sorcerer, right? I'm using my game knowledge to try to, like, fuck him over here, like the gears are turning. Well, I believe you mentioned, as a sorcerer, you don't need to wear armor. And you're not wearing armor right now. And I mean, we have a fighter and a cleric and the rest, but because you're not wearing armor, you could most easily get through this crack in the wall, right? Right? This man started sweating almost immediately. Ooh, and it was juicy. This man's entire character seemed to be based solely around the idea of killing things, so he did not stop for a second to think about taking the grease spell. Rookie mistake. The next steps were simple. He tried to squeeze his way through this tight crack. Had to roll a dexterity check to get through. Didn't roll super well because that's how, you know, dice work sometimes. Scraped his whole body a bunch and took, I think, like 2 damage. You know, the usual amount of damage that people take while caving. This man was not happy about this. At all. Like, from a certain point, I get it, right? Like, you're a sorcerer. You have 6 hit points. You take 2 damage, and that's like a double-digit percentage of your body mass just gone. But immediately, this man's attitude just changed the second he took this damage. Gone were the quips about alcoholism. Gone were the weird little, like, sexual innuendo jokes. Oh yeah, I didn't really mention that, but there was a couple of those. Like, I can't remember any, like, specific examples, and I don't want to make any up, because that would be weird. But he was upset. He was sulking. Like, there's really no other way to describe it, you know? At the very least, this made him a little more docile for the rest of the session, so we sort of just got through it and out the other side, and yeah! Oh. So we sort of just got through it and killed some goblins and got some treasure, and like, yay. But this is a story that I think about a lot because I think it really encapsulates a kind of mentality that some people take to Dungeons & Dragons, which I really think is antithetical to the game as a whole. Role-playing games in general as well. I think what Todd and people like Todd fail to take into account when they're playing games like D&D is that this is a team game. And more than that, it's not a game you can win. The decisions that Todd made in roleplay were all centered around himself. He was going up to the bar, he was engaging in conversations, he was creating these scenes that didn't give anybody else at the table an opportunity to contribute. Like, if you, one person, runs off by yourself and starts having a conversation with one other person, like, there's no invitation there for other people to join. There's no pathway for people to contribute to that conversation. It is a private conversation. And I think that was doubly compounded by the fact that we were playing with people who were very new at the game. They didn't know that they could join the scene also. They would probably just think that they would be interrupting something, which then leads into another issue. Like, Todd didn't know his audience. He'd never met us before. Like, Todd had never met us before. He didn't know anybody at the table. Like, there was a good chance that making horny quips about being a drunkard probably made some of us uncomfortable. To be honest, it kinda did. Like, the vibe was off, man. Even going so far as to play a sorcerer, a class that historically doesn't have that many supportive spells or abilities, is like, he's just trying to live his own power fantasy, with no care for what anybody else wants. He wants to be the hero. He wants to be the main character. He wants to be the center of attention at all times. And like, there's 5 people at the table. That can't and shouldn't happen. And then there's also the notion of failure, which is a key concept in Dungeons & Dragons. D&D is a role-playing game. A game, by definition, needs to have win states, loss states. I guess that's a bad metaphorical example that kind of breaks down the more you think about it, but like, you can die in D&D. Like, that's just a thing that can happen. You can roll poorly, you can make bad decisions, you can critically fail at anything at any time. And you could really see that. Like, the second he rolled poorly and took damage, like, he was sulking. He was a sore loser. Except, unlike in other games, instead of being a sore loser at another player, he was a sore loser at the concept of the universe. At the concept of random chance, at a plastic dice. Actually, I think technically he was being a sore loser to me specifically because I was the one who told him to go through the small crevice. And I regret nothing. Fuck that guy. Yes, it can be fun to play the hero, to have these moments where you feel like you're the main character, but having a game where you can feel like a cohesive part of a greater whole, I think that's way more special. And think about it this way. The moments where you do have these power surges and you do feel like the main character, they are special because they are so few and far between. If you were just the main character all the time and were the best at everything and like super cool, like it wouldn't be Dungeons and Dragons. It would just be my life, baby. That's so stupid. And you know, I do like to think about this story from time to time because I think it really serves as a reminder to not let ourselves fall into these traps. Like, it can be really easy to get sucked into this idea of being super cool and awesome and like hogging the spotlight, you know? But doing that 100% of the time takes away from other people's chance in the spotlight. And not only that, you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to make others' moments in the spotlight all the more better. Like, why would you want to stand on the middle of the stage all by yourself when you could have a moment to stand in the middle of a stage being hoisted up by your very closest friends? All you gotta do is hoist them up from time to time. Like, this is honestly a thought that's fundamentally changed how I approach D&D, or like how I go about creating characters. You know, like when I first started playing the game, I really thought about like, oh, what would be cool? Like what would be awesome? Like what would be fun to do? You know what I mean? And now when I'm creating characters, I sit down and ask myself, what would it be like for this character to fail? How would this character react to getting seriously hurt, trying something and falling flat on their face? Like, could I be able to find humor and fun in those kinds of scenarios as well? Like, if I was playing a gritty and dark anti-hero who was really serious all the time, like that's just not gonna work when you roll a natural 1 on trying to open a door, which can happen to anyone, at any time. I think we all need a reminder sometimes that we need to be able to find the fun in failure, because that's a core fundamental part of D&D. Like, we need to be able to look at our failures and not take them so personally, even if they are personal failings. Like, we need to be able to stumble and fall flat on our face without, you know, thinking that's the end of the world. In games and in life, we need to find that fun in failure, because it is there. And when we do fail, it's not the end of the world. It's all just one more dice roll that we make as part of our journey. Anyway, I think I'm just yapping on at this point. Don't be Todd. Yeah.